For some time we watched the tent burn and Joseph along with it. I cannot recall what thoughts passed through my head, if any passed at all. How can one process such horrors with a complete grip on their rational faculties? Rationality had left us all behind. The only thing left to do was gawk like idiots. Eric was the first to turn away from Joseph's smoldering corpse. Notably, the rifle remained in his grasp. He paced around the campsite, glancing all the while at the fleshy monument. Frightened by his agitated behavior, I backed away slowly from the scene. But Igor caught me under the arm and pulled me towards our armed director. I was his moral support. "What in the hell is going on here?" he asked. Madeline, who had finished emptying the contents of her stomach, joined Igor in his anger. "This was never about the Yedoma, was it?" she said. Even Ulrich spoke up. "You owe us an explanation," he said. Understandably, our remaining guide was the least forgiving of Eric's secrecy. His friend had died for a mission none of us fully understood. If not for the gun in Eric's hands, I believe the guide would have paid blood with blood. Instead, he could only curse and stomp around in anger. Silent as the night, Eli appeared beside us with his book in hand. He adjusted his glasses and sighed from deep within his chest. "If you won't tell them," he said to Eric, "then I suppose I will." "Eli, we swore too. Someone is dead, Eric. Let them hear the truth." "Advertisements. Very well. But the mission does not change," he said. In a calm, calculated manner, Eli proceeded to tell us how the entire climate mission was a cover for PR purposes. We had expected as much, and agreed that Greenway shareholders would not be thrilled to hear about their energy company partaking in meaningless archaeological expeditions. However, as Eli explained in excessively reasonable and measured terms, there was a meaning behind their venture. To emphasize his point, he held up the black, leather-bound book. The great, Gothic tome was, he claimed, the Demon's Grimoire. Not a translation. Not a copy. But the very book of legend. Doubtlessly, you need no reminder of the stories. All who glimpse its pages are destined for a terrible and gruesome end. So, you can imagine the murmur that ran through the lot of us. Whether or not we believed Eli was beside the point. The truth had already taken a rotten turn. However, determined to explain himself, Eli continued. The stories we had heard about the book were simply that. If he was to be believed, the Demon's Grimoire contained a great wealth of knowledge about what the world was and could be, knowledge supposedly passed down by godly beings from beyond. As it pertained to their expedition, the grimoire spoke of an ancient city built by the gods themselves. The book did not say where exactly this city was located, however. That revelation came in a dream. According to Eli, he, Eric, and Joseph shared this very same dream on the very same night after reading the Demon's Grimoire together one evening. It was then a voice shared with them the coordinates of the city, adding that he was sleeping there. This mysterious voice could only belong to one of the gods. After all, how else could they each have been contacted in the same way at the same time? I looked at Eric, who was still sulking with rifle in hand. He nodded to confirm it was true. Having suspended my disbelief, I still found one glaring issue in Eli's story. We had traveled to the divinely given coordinates and found no city or sleeping god. Instead, we had found a monument. Nothing beside remained. When I said as much, Eli seemed troubled and Eric even more so. "It must be here," our director said. "We will not leave until we find it." "And Joseph?" Igor asked. "Yes. What of Joseph?" I thought. Joseph himself had heard his God's call and come running to the desolate tundra to receive his blessings. Instead, he was treated to madness and mutation, neither of which I could accurately explain. Unfortunately, neither Eli nor Eric could explain it either. Their blank and distant stares offered little comfort to those of us that wanted to leave. Still, the mission was not finished. On the contrary, Eric decided to accelerate excavation with controlled explosions of ammonium nitrate. Offering our gun-toting leader all due respect, I objected to this idea. Naturally, I was overruled. Eric detonated one explosive before realizing his mistake. The ammonium nitrate ignited a pocket of methane, of which there are many in Yakutia's thawing permafrost, and burst into a massive ball of flame. In addition to nearly killing Eric, the explosion also came dangerously close to the relic. Fractures ran through the ground, which shifted under the revolting artifact. One more explosive and he was likely to return it underground, where it rightfully belonged. Eric had no choice but to continue Joseph's work with a shovel. And a load of good it did. After days of work, he had not found a single sign of the ancient city or his god. It was obvious to me, as I am sure it is to you, there was no city to be found. Even so, people were growing restless. Madeline and Ulrich joined Eric and Eli in their search, if only to get home sooner. But the work seemed to sap the very life force out of them. In a matter of hours, I noticed a severe decline in their health and mood. More and more they resembled Joseph before his imminent demise. Their faces had grown long and pale. Sweat dripped from their willowy bodies. And madness slipped into their speech. Infighting and outbursts became all too common. Igor too grew quick to anger, but I suppose it was out fear. He had noticed the group's decline and feared their transformation into monsters like Joseph had become. Although the notion disturbed me as well, the thought of leaving, for whatever reason, absolutely roiled the acid in my gut. I found myself searching for excuses to continue the search, though I had no logical reason to do so. It was then I developed a theory, baseless though not impossible, about what had happened to Joseph and what was happening to all of us. Imprisoned in the permafrost was more than just methane. It has been said by some academics that bacteria and viruses of forgotten ages may also lie dormant in the frozen earth. Perhaps by breaking up the ground we have released a plague upon ourselves. If this were the case, it would be reckless to return to society. Our only choice was to stay. Even as I shared the theory, I felt my intuition scream in protest. A sickness lay on us. That much was certain. Whether or not it was natural, however, I could not say. No pathogen I knew of could do what it did to Joseph. But the others accepted my theory without complaint. I suppose the alternative, the truth, was even more frightening. So, like it or not, everyone agreed to stay and doom ourselves to the very same fate that took Joseph. Next to deteriorate was Eli. According to Madeline's account, he was shuffling in a spiral around the fleshy monument like water around a drain. Though she called out to him, he could not hear or see anything beyond the relic. So blind was he to the world around him that he fell face first into a hole. Upon pulling him out, Madeline found him burning a fever and muttering senselessly. By the time I saw Eli, he was already in another world entirely. We wrapped him in a blanket and lay a moist cloth over his head. It did nothing to sober his deepening state of insanity. He muttered ceaselessly about the body and blood and the cleansing of earth. I found the chatter quite ominous, but Eli's physical transformations repulsed me to an even greater extent. His limbs drooped while his arteries bulged against his taut skin. Bloody tears ran down his cheek, and his pupils dilated until they consumed the entirety of his eye. As I backed out of the tent, I heard the stuttering growl of an engine revving. Without hesitation, Eric bolted after the car, shouting hysterically. I heard the crack of his rifle and the sound of the car skidding to a stop. After a moment of brief silence, the rifle fired again. I looked around the camp and determined the guide had stolen the car. Now he was dead. Feeling a rising sickness in my gut, I returned to my tent. Igor was there waiting for me with a look of desperation on his face. "It is the artifact," he said. "We need to destroy it." "Eric will not like that," I said. "It has poisoned us. We will not be free until it is gone," Igor continued. "You must help me. Tonight we will use the ammonium nitrate." Igor's plan struck me as the most sensible thing I had heard throughout the entire expedition. If there was one common thread running through our troubles, it was that terrible monument of madness. Still, I resisted. "I am afraid I don't feel comfortable with explosives," I said. Igor protested vehemently. Destroying the artifact was a necessity for all of us. If we did not do it now, then we would not get the opportunity again. Madness would take us before long. I assumed he was right, but I could not bring myself to join him. "I cannot," I told him, "but I will not stop you either. Do what you must. I won't tell anyone." Disappointed, though unsurprised, Igor returned to his tent. Exhausted by the troubling sequence of events, I went to sleep. With luck, the nightmare would be over by the time I woke up. But sleep had its own nightmares to offer. Again I found myself amid a shattered world of bleeding shadow. And again, a voice called to me. "Hear me and obey," it said. Its dark, tortured timbre shook the very fabric of my dream. "Be my city of body and blood." I awoke in a sweat. For several moments, the voice's echo lingered between my ears. Gasping for air, I sat up and stared ahead. Just then a silhouette passed by the entrance to my tent. It was still nighttime, so I could only assume it was Igor about to enact his plan. Rather than lie in wait for an explosion to startle me, I got up to follow him. But it was not Igor sulking through the darkness. It was Eli. If not for his glasses, I would not have recognized him. The man's rotund belly had caved in as his back had hunched over. His sinking arms had taken on a vegetative texture like dusky roots reaching ever downward with bristly hairs feeling for sustenance. The skin below his eyes drooped down an inch, showing a long stretch of moist, pink flesh that glistened in the starlight. Notably, Eli's black book was missing. Only a madman would approach him, and that I had not yet become. Instead, I sated my curiosity by following from a distance. I watched Eli slink down the crater towards the relic. Apparently he was conscious enough to avoid the holes his team had dug, for this time he wove around them without so much as a glance. His focus was singular. Slowly, deliberately, he made his way to the relic. Although I hadn't the slightest notion what might happen when Eli reached the relic, the darker recesses of my mind waited with much excitement. I even felt a small flutter in my chest as if my subconscious were cheering for that very moment. Yet, in my heart of hearts, I knew the result could not be good. After what I had seen in Yakutia, the only reasonable expectation was one of horror. There was a brief pause after Eli reached the relic. Eyes twitching, he stared at the bladed orifice in the monument. Whatever humanity remained in him resisted with all its waning strength. But in the end, it gave out. Without warning, Eli slammed his head into the artifact again and again. The 3 curved blades dug into his skin and his eyes. Skin ripped and blood poured as his flesh caught on the artifact. This was his sacrifice to the god of his dreams. And the sacrifice was accepted. The monument latched onto his face, absorbing it into its grisly architecture. Eli's body expanded, losing all form and definition. He became a sheet of writhing flesh that smothered the cold, dense earth. Black veins forked through his stretched tissue as it reached for yards in every direction. Terror and revulsion swallowed whatever curiosity lingered inside me. I stood, dumbstruck, grasping for words to make sense of what I had seen. Not far off, Igor jogged towards me. He carried a bag of ammonium nitrate in one hand and a small detonator in the other. His stupefied expression reflected mine perfectly. "Do you see?" he said. "We have to destroy it." I was in complete agreement. Yet, it pained me to say so. How could I cling to that horrid abomination after what I had seen? How could any part of me resist what I knew was necessary? "Answer my call," I heard as a whisper in my head. I stumbled as my vision dizzied. "Join me," it spoke in waking reality. "Are you all right?" Igor asked. "Yes," I lied, "do it. We must do it." Igor started towards the fleshy artifact when a shot rang behind me. Instinctively, I ducked to avoid harm. When I looked back, I saw Eric standing over me with his rifle smoking. Thankfully, I was unharmed. Igor, however, fell to his knee. Blood steamed as it ran in hot streams down his leg. "It is what he wants," Eric said. "You can't interfere. I won't let you." He ran into the crater as Igor stumbled to his feet. With the butt of his gun, Eric beat Igor over the head once, twice, 3 times. After the 3rd blow, the detonator fell from his hand. Against my best judgments and the voice clawing at the edge of my hearing, I rushed to grab it. I succeeded in this endeavor, and in drawing Eric's attention. Seizing the opportunity, Igor limped towards the monument with the ammonium nitrate in hand. Eric did not so much as look. Somehow he knew Igor's fate was already sealed. As soon as Igor approached the expanse of undulating flesh, a tentacle sprung out. It wrapped around his neck and pulled him forward. At once, Igor dropped the explosives and dug his hands into the dirt. But the veiny tendril dragged him without burden, and already blood spilled from his throat. I could smell the iron in the air. In a matter of seconds, the blanket of flesh consumed him. Igor screamed in a gut-wrenching tone, but only for a moment. Once his body melded into the collective, the throbbing mass expanded, forming strange, geometric pillars that appeared designed by some cruel and twisted architect. With eyes glossy and forked with veins, Eric looked at me and grimaced. His nostrils flared, and his lip twitched. All the while a crack carved a path through his brow. Bulbous, red tumors pushed through the fissure, forming into eyes and mouths and bones. I heard the voice again, this time from Eric's own lips. "Why do you resist me?" it said. Eric threw away the gun in a threatening display of confidence. Behind him I could see the mutated figure of Ulrich haul a screaming Madeline to the monument. Together they fell into the mass of sculpted meat and blood. Madeline's shouts darkened and stuttered as her face was absorbed into the hole. Ulrich melted without a sound. Their sacrifices fed the monstrous city of flesh, which spread to unexpected heights. Once all there was, the horrid monument now seemed a simple stroke on a canvas of ever-expanding horrors. "Do you not understand?" the voice said. "Already my signal rolls across the land, infecting the minds of every living thing. They will join to me, and we will grow until the world is alive with flesh and blood. Who are you to stop me? The earth is thawed. I cannot be buried now. I was no one. The more its words seeped into my head, the more it seemed so. I was a servant, a slave, a sacrificial lamb. My body was forfeit and my mind incommensurate with the grandeur of my God. Eric grabbed me by the ankle and dragged me forward to join the rest. I was inclined to let him. Yet, as I approached my imminent death, I saw the explosives lying where Igor had left them, just inches from the corporeal city. In my fleeting identity, I roused the last of my will and remembered the simple plan Igor had formed. As I triggered the detonator, I hoped the god was wrong. Perhaps he could still be buried. Igniting upon an underlying pocket of methane, the ammonium nitrate exploded in a glorious blast of fire. Fragments of flesh and bone erupted outward, and blood rained from the sky. Tremors shook the earth, and the ground fell inward. I scrambled manically to get out in time. Eric was not so lucky. Where he once stood, I now saw a cloud of dust and a splatter of red. As for the artifact, I could not say whether it was buried or destroyed. It was nowhere to be seen, and frankly, that was the only comfort I needed. The god's voice fell silent, and my sanity flooded back to me. I took one of the jeeps and fled that cursed place with reckless abandon. And so it was that I returned to you, the lone survivor of a living nightmare. For some time I endured that truth in silence, suffering your twisted conspiracy theories and pointed accusations. I did it for you, so the truth could never lead you to such cruel terrors as I had experienced. Yet, you have beaten me beyond my patience. If you could not keep quiet, I reasoned, then no longer could I now take my honest account and put your curiosity to rest because it can only do you harm. Bury it, so you should never think to look for it again. Please. For all our sakes.